Dear audience, I'm happy to be here and talk to you about an ongoing work. This is an interim presentation of interim results compounded by 4 country experts from Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, and Hungary, who would like to study the ongoing changes around biomass energy. We gathered a whole compilation of interesting data that I'm trying to compress in a digestible manner for you, and please feel free to stop me at any point throughout my talk. I would like to start with just a very brief introduction, because I'm not sure about the background of people who are interested about the role of primary solid biomass in energy. It is the most important renewable energy. In Europe, it gives about 40 to 70% of total renewable energy, even in the golden era of photovoltaics and windmills. So it is there. It has been there for quite a long time. But biomass energy comes with many issues. So the eligibility of biomass to renewable energy support schemes has been recently put on European debate, and the RED III directive is reflecting many of these concerns. First of all, about the renewability. For example, if we focus our attention to forest-based solid biomass, forestry regeneration, the renewability of forests are much more complex than previously understood. And with the onset of climatic changes, already 4 countries experience major limits to renewability of forest regeneration. As economists put it, forests are depletable renewable energy sources. You can harvest too much and impede regeneration of this resource, and then it becomes non-renewable. Also, to add an ecological argument to this, many people argue that there are non-renewable forestry resources like virgin forest or old growth forest. This is wood, but if you cut it and it regenerates, it never will become the same. It is never going to be an old growth forest anymore. It is another important debate in Europe. About sustainability. Many forms of forestry biomass is not sustainable, like illegal logging, or if you harvest more than the annual current increment of the forests. Also, intensive energy plantations that are very environmentally polluting are not considered sustainable. Regarding air pollution, we should remember that firewood is a very intensive source of the most dangerous air pollutants. And about climate neutrality of the wood, it is probably the hottest of the debates that is going on. The zero carbon emission factor of biomass fuels has been questioned for at least 2 reasons. First of all, it has been a convention to account for the carbon that is lost when biomass is burned for energy in the silo of the land use change and forestry sector. Counting it at the stack, at the chimney of the power plants, would be double counting. So theoretically, it is okay to count for the loss of carbon in the forestry sector and emit carbon and the power plants with zero emission factor. As it turned out, in the past 3 decades, since climate science has been advancing a lot, there is so much uncertainty relating to the convention of accounting for the loss of carbon in the forestry sector that it is now highly questioned if this should be switched around and calculate for the emissions at the point where biomass is actually being combusted. Second, biomass fuels are the most carbon intensive of solid fuels, at least 10–12% more carbon intensive than the least quality coal. So it is emitting a lot of carbon, and in the era of constrained carbon budget that we are now living in, we all know that we have no more than 400 to 450 gigatons of more CO2 to emit to be within the limit defined by the Paris Agreement. It actually makes a real difference if in the next 3 decades this carbon remains tied up in forests or in wood products, or it is released back to the atmosphere, because we are approaching a tipping point in climate policy around 2050. And finally, about the energy efficiency segment, this is one of the key topics for Adam and WWF. Most people who use firewood for energy use it with a lot of water content. And if wet firewood is fueled, it's not only very air polluting, but much of the energy is lost. It is a very, very low net heating value to the firewood that people typically use. And last but not least, support policies are not making a difference if the biomass is burned for heat or electricity, but they should. Burning it for heat comes with at least 80 or 90% of net energy efficiency, while doing it for electricity, you are losing 70% of the energy that is in the wood, because the net efficiency is typically not more than 30%. This is basically the broad context, and a little bit about for the policy context. I would say that the policy incentives have been imbalanced to benefit biomass to energy, to say the least. Why I'm saying it? Because first of all, there have been much direct and indirect support going out for renewable energy, while in the same time, no incentives are there for forest owners and forest managers for carbon removal and storage. This is a heavy imbalance in most European countries' climate policy. While in the meantime, forests produce a lot of useful material for materials industry and for the energy sector without receiving any of the climate benefits that is generated. And on the other hand, again, those who use climate as wood as a climate-friendly material or wood as a climate-neutral energy source enjoy some cost reductions because of the policy tools that are out there. For example, like limiting your emissions under the European Emissions Trading Scheme. Secondly, all the strategic government documents that are concerning the forestry sector, they foresee a rapidly decreasing carbon stock in European countries for several reasons. In the context of the V4 countries, we share the followings of this: aging forest stock, growing intensity of harvesting because of demand pressure, failing afforestation plans. Some of our countries are missing afforestation plans completely. Where there are afforestation plans, they fail to deliver. And last but not least, the onset of climatic changes is already heavily felt in many of our countries, which translates to loss of growth and loss of tree cover, sometimes loss of complete species like spruce stands in Central Europe. And finally, we know that there is a steeply increasing demand for biomass energy. In the short run, we saw what happened in the energy crisis. Our research unit conducted a household survey, and it found that firewood use almost doubled after the Ukrainian war started in Hungary. In the medium run, we know that policies are having very ambitious renewable energy targets, and that those cannot be achieved without biomass for energy. And in the long run, we know that the promise of the biomass energy with CCS is very attractive for policymakers, because it is a promise of delivering energy and sequestering, removing carbon from the atmosphere at the same time. So in the long run, we can expect for a lot of biomass energy CCS coming if it hits the marketability cost floor and it becomes compatible more or less with some state aid. And just add to it the demand that is foreseen for wood as a material in the circular economy context. And now you have a little more complex picture about the demand pressure that is building up against forest wood. I don't want to take the topics that Adam will cover. I just would like to mention that in the recent years, the policy framework has been starting to change. The LULUCF regulation significantly switched from the no debit rule to actual removal targets for our countries. There is an ETS2 to be commenced very shortly, and it adds to the pressure on building operators, building owners to do their building energy with less carbon intensive fuels. Watch out for demand against wood again. And the carbon removal sequestration framework is adding a market demand for certified and independently verifiable removal projects. The most interesting probably is the storage of wood in long-lasting wood-based construction products and permanent carbon removals in biomass energy CCM projects. Also, we already have the Green Claims Directive on European debate, which would protect European consumers from company greenwashers. And inter alia, among all the claims that are going to be scrutinized by this directive, is one important aspect here for us, that is that any offsetting claims must be independently certified and transparent and backed by valid carbon credits. This is necessarily adding to the demand for forestation projects. And finally, the European Industrial Carbon Management Strategy is a signal that a lot of earmarked money will be handed out for projects that remove by industrial technologies carbon from the air. I would like to draw your attention to the 250 target number. That's 450 million tons per year is a huge number. It's about roughly 1/3 of the current European ETS cap. The ETS cap is 1.5 billion currently. So almost 1/3 of the current ETS cap is going to be supported for industrial removal projects, biomass energy CCS included again. After this long introduction, now I'm getting to the actual data that I would like to present you about the biomass energy big picture in the Visegrad 4 context. Before we have this chart about how much actual biomass energy, primary solid biomass, is used for energy purposes in our countries. The magnitude is almost 700 petajoules, is almost 700, it's 7 times the Hungarian total primary energy supply. So this is a huge number. We see that in Poland there has been a correction in the methodology. I'm not sure if Krzysztof would like to address on that. It's not very important. It all happened in our countries a little earlier. It's not a substantial change, but it really adds to the complexity of the picture. And if we contrapose another breakdown of the same data and look for how the various energy use sectors share this amount of biomass energy, we see something very interesting. We have the households, that the single largest consuming entity, that has been there for several decades now without any incentives. This is a market decision of households to burn wood for energy. But all the rest of the sectors are there because of some sort of government policy, either a direct support for renewable energy or some kind of indirect incentive, like being under the European ETS. You can avoid carbon costs if you start to combust wood. I'd like to draw attention to the second piece of the stack, that is the industry sector. It's huge and it's growing. Industry sector is really hungry for wood as energy source because they can significantly save their carbon costs by wood. So maybe the takeaway from these two charts is that biomass energy has been large, it is still growing, and that support policy really makes a huge difference. More details of the big picture. Interestingly, all of our 4 countries now have about 8% of biomass energy in their energy balances. It hasn't been so even in the past decade, but now all the 4 countries have 8%. Unlike in their transformation sectors, we have 2 to 3% of biomass energy as an input energy source in our heat and power sectors. And in the household sector, we have 20 to 30% of primary solid biomass used in the household energy balance. So we see that it is a very important source for the households and quite important for our total national economies with 8% totality. Now for the gap. Many of you have been heard this before, but it is a new addition to a fairly long story, that the supply-demand gap between official sources of primary solid biomass and biomass energy use is not a Hungarian-specific problem. Now we could quantify the same in the four countries, and I'm sharing you the results. First of all, we see the Czech case, and I'm not sure if you can read the color code, so I have to have with some guidance. The lightest of the brown column stacks is the transformation sector. So this is the auto producers and producers of heat and power who use wood as a fuel. The second is the industrial users. And the third, the largest and the darkest of the brown column stacks, is the household sector of the Czech economy. We have others invisible on the very top. In the shaded areas, we have the sources. The blue one is the net of exports and imports from Czechia and to Czechia. It is a very strange looking, strange shaped picture, and after some reading and with the help of Christoph, who could confirm the reason behind, I'm sorry, from Aldrich, yes, from Aldrich, the reason behind this huge export is it's a calamity that has been happening all over Central Europe, from Slovenia, Austria, Czechia, Slovakia, because of the several years of drought, less of precipitation. Several spruce stands suffered so heavily that they couldn't withstand pests, and the so-called bark beetles infested the forest so heavily that salvation cuttings, sanitary cuttings were needed, and huge amounts of wood was cut before being demolished by the bark beetle invasion, and it was marketed to save at least some of the costs that foresters made. Unluckily, we do not have more export-import data in Eurostat, so the time series is stopped in 2018. Really looking forward to how this all boils down in Czechia. And the greens are domestic sources of primary solid biomass. The dark green is the forestry origin. wood material for energy purposes, and the lighter green is the residues and harvesting waste that also channels into the energy sector. The picture is a little different for Hungary. We never have had spruce forests, so the calamity did not impact Hungarian forestry. We see some fluctuations in export and imports, but basically this country is also a net exporter of wood material. And we see that, again, similarly to Czechia, the claimed usage of biomass for energy is much, much higher in terms of terajoules than the sources that are accounted for. One addition compared to Czechia is the lightest of the greens. You can see here is the agricultural waste that are used by power plants for energy in Hungary, and official data reported by the energy regulator. For Poland, the picture is much less grim. We basically do not see the gap between demand and supply. We see that they are also struggling with the statistical methodologies. There is a jump in 2018. Hungarian context, it happened about 5 years earlier than that. But interestingly, Poland is not showing a real gap between the official statistics. Unlike Slovakia and is very similar. The picture is very similar to that of Hungary. We see that they are also exporting the sanitary cutting products heavily, and we know from Veronica, who unluckily dropped out in the middle of the project for a little time. We know that illegal logging is highly on the political agenda in Slovakia, and based on my instincts after several years of studying biomass statistics, these production figures that we see basically flatlining over 10 years are very, very unrealistic. So it is just a speculation from my side. Okay, what is the context of this supply-demand gap? This is not a Central European phenomenon. I did a little bit of research and found that the European average gap is about 10 to 15%. In the Central European context, it is much higher. So it is a bigger problem here. It is basically explained by a combination of factors, according to our several research projects that we had before. Illegal logging is foremost. Unregistered import of wood fuels is a second addition to it. Waste burning by household as accounted for as biomass is most common and highly debated and very hard to detect. And there are statistical issues on both sides of the statistics. So if you do forestry statistics research or energy statistics research, you find that there are many unpublished details, and you cannot simply justify if these data are what is the confidence interval of these data at all. Interestingly, we found in a previous project done jointly with WWF in 3 countries, Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary, none of the government authorities seem to be interested. They really don't care. And we found 2 basic reasons. From the energy administrations, it's fine because it's renewable energy. You have huge targets that are very hard to reach anyway. So if you happen to find out that half of this is not wood, but unsorted household waste burned for energy, then you're in trouble because they're using actual statistical data of renewable energy against an ever-growing target of renewable energy. So they are not really incentivized to find out the real explanation for the gap. On the forestry side, I think the problem is much deeper because forestry is maybe one of the last sectors where there is no independent justification of data reported. All the national and government statistics are self-reported by foresters, and all those who are supposed to cross-check it are, again, foresters who come from the same industry, and it's very hard to justify forestry data. the Renewable Energy Directive has made some move forward, and I really would stop here, and Adam takes more coverage on this topic. One final lesson to it: if you are ever going to head a Ministry of Energy, please do not launch any support scheme for primary solid biomass until this picture is cleared out. How can you know what you are paying for? You are handing out a lot of state support for something that you basically cannot be sure where it comes from, what it comprises of. Is it actually biomass or not? It is not the case. They are very happy to support biomass energy, even with this huge uncertainty in mind. And now finally, I'm getting to the climate context. Where is it better to have the wood? In the energy sector, burned for energy, or in the wood? We see here the greenhouse gas emissions in CO2 equivalent of the 4 countries that I just compiled from the national inventory reports. What I would like to draw attention here is the flatlining. Maybe there is some little declining trend, but in the era where Europe is leading the way towards climate neutrality, we are in the tens. So the last 10 years, basically we see no decline in greenhouse gas emissions in our countries. In the meantime, we are fueling a huge amount of biomass for energy. And I'd like to give you an interesting context to it. The national inventory reports include the CO2 emissions. They need not be counted against the national inventory of the country, but it must be reported. So I contraposed the 4 countries' CO2 emissions from biomass burning against the carbon that is sequestered by their forest land sector and their harvested wood production. And we can see a very interesting thing that in all of our countries, the biomass originated CO2 emissions are much larger than the carbon that is sequestered by the remaining forest land. So it is a really important question to sort this out and provide a balanced climate policy to facilitate forest carbon sequestration and penalize carbon-intensive biomass burning for energy with an effective emission factor to take this market bias out of the picture. And my very last slide is about the compilation of the National Energy and Climate Plan data of the 4 countries and added up everything. On the top part, we see the electricity and heat plans based on biomass. The last data is from the energy balances from the Eurostat, and the 2030 data is from the NECPs. And we see that biomass electricity is going to increase in the coming decade with almost 50% in the 4 countries, while biomass heat is basically flatlining. It's not projected to grow at all, which is, after all what I said, is a very dubious plan. The lower part of the chart is about the removals of carbon by the forestry sector. On the left-hand side, in the 2020, we see the greenhouse gas inventory data of the 4 countries added up. So altogether, 20 million CO2 equivalent carbon was removed permanently by the forestry sector per year, in that very year. And on the right-hand side, we see the pessimistic and optimistic NECP scenarios in various shades of green, contraposed to the LULUCF target combined for these 4 countries. That is more than 50 million negative emissions removals targeted for our 4 countries. We see that the pessimistic case, we see a 40% decrease of carbon sequestration as opposed to the really ambitiously growing target. Even in the optimistic case, it is basically 0 change, 4% decrease. And the distance to the target is huge. It's like 4 times smaller in the pessimistic case and 2.5 times smaller in the optimistic case, compared to what these countries are obliged to deliver from their forestry sector. This is where I stop, and questions are welcome. Thank you.